Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Bajer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It gives you the tools and inspiration to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. This is where we explore how to cultivate remarkable cultures that scale and evolve as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
To consider influence from the perspective of asking gaps as well. So when you were talking about people who just charge ahead versus people who hold back, asking gaps are distributed along lines of power and privilege, and people with more power and privilege ask more often for more than people without it. And what happens is those of us who are people pleasers, people, we're supportive and kind, we tend to be reflexively and reactively generous. We reward the people who ask, and we just don't notice the people who don't. And so my challenge to leaders who are in this situation that most of the people I like the most are in is when somebody comes and asks you for a privilege or an exception or some extra resources, to ask yourself who could have asked but they didn't, and is there a policy that should change?
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 131 of the Culture Lab podcast. This episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-a-kind accelerator program where culture leaders get hands-on support and guidance on how to reach their goals faster, especially now in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. CultureBrained connects you with outstanding peers on the same journey, but also with world-class experts, including people you know from the show. And they all help you identify and implement new, better ways of creating a culture where people do their best work. Check it out at tinyurl.com/culturebrained. And no need to write it down. There's a link in the show notes. Do you want to be more influential? For most of us, the answer is yes. Greater influence translates to more power, and it enables us to achieve our goals, drive change, and create a significant impact. But delving into the strategies and tactics of influence can leave us feeling uneasy. Words like manipulative, sneaky, and coercive come to mind. And it's because, according to my guest, Zoe Chance, the idea of influence has been corrupted by techie, greedy people using techie, greedy tactics to sell used cars, to promote sponsors' products on social media, and to get us to buy now while supplies last. Zoe Chance, however, champions a different approach. As a distinguished behavioral scientist at Yale School of Management, she empowers smart and kind individuals to harness influence effectively. Her role at Yale involves guiding executives and teaching the highly sought-after MBA elective, Mastering Influence and Persuasion. Her students achieve remarkable feats. They raise funds for charities, win political seats, kickstart successful startups, initiate social movements, save lives, and change company cultures. And so can you. Tune in to find out how.
My name is Zoe Chance. I'm a professor at Yale School of Management, and I'm the author of Influence is Your Superpower. I teach the school's most popular class. It's called Mastering Influence and Persuasion, and we practice the Spider-Man doctrine, which means with great power comes great responsibility. So I love getting to work with leaders around the world, helping them be more influential, empower their teams to be more influential, and exert good influence on society around us.
Zoe, welcome to the Culture Lab podcast. I am so excited to be in conversation with you today because I think a lot of our listeners are so eager to learn from you. But before we go there and before we dive into the topic, I always kick off these interviews with the same question. And the question is about you, and it's about the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person. How did you grow up, and what impact did it have on what you do today?
I love this question. And I was thinking about this in preparation for talking with you. I love that you ask. I notice that for me, as a white person in the dominant group in the United States where I grew up, I didn't think about culture because I didn't think that being American is anything. I didn't think that being white is anything because I was just part of the dominant soup. My husband, for example, grew up as a brown immigrant in Germany, thinking about cultural influences all the time. But in my family culture, we had very strong microcultural influences, and my biggest influence was my mom. She is the funnest person that I have ever known, and she still lives with me, and she's still a good influence. I call her my Swami mommy, and she helps me raise my daughter, and she's so fun that she's just always encouraging me to look for the beauty and the joy and to create it if I can't find it. So, tiny example would be during the pandemic, we're on lockdown. We have my mom, my daughter, my sister, her husband, their tiny baby, and their cat had moved in with us and our dog and our cat. So we're just in close quarters. I'm teaching virtually. All of us are going crazy. Plus, we have this 1 month old baby. And my mom comes into the kitchen. She has a cake with this giant, not candle, like a birthday candle, but a firework, huge sparkler thing that's shooting sparks and flames, and the sparks are going like 10 feet. I'm terrified she's going to set the house on fire. And she's singing, Happy Thursday to you. And I just love it. She inspired my
I
daughter,
love it.
it was 2 weeks after the lockdown happened in this crazy situation of stress and turmoil. And my daughter spent those 2 weeks plotting until April 1st is April Fool's Day, where in our culture, we do pranks on each other. And she had plotted and planned 29 pranks that she executed against us, these practical jokes.
Wow.
So I would
That
say
is nuts.
it's been a real blessing to have a family culture of fun that comes into my work and my teaching and my personal life.
That sounds amazing. And I'm guessing that your mom's name is Karen,
She
right?
is, and you know that because you read the dedication in the book. Thank you.
Exactly, exactly. And I want to talk about the magic of making good things happen because you dedicate the book to her this way, saying that you've learned so much. And I love this introduction because it's a really vivid way to paint the picture of what those good things are and how your mom has influenced you. You also said in the book, somewhere I think in the first chapter, if I'm not mistaken, that your home was an adventure but school was lonely for you. I'm going to read out now a passage. You say, people talked over me when I spoke consistently, and making friends did not come naturally to me. And I'm curious, what has changed that? Because you don't strike me as this person today. I can't imagine that people would talk over you today. So for me, it would be really interesting to understand what was your journey? How have you been able to become a more influential person yourself?
I would say a core part of my identity remains being an introvert. And I connect especially with a lot of introverts in the work that I do, and also with leaders who are leaders of teams of introverts and extroverts, of course. And one of the key things about introversion that I teach, and this is relevant for me as a kid and also relevant for me now, this idea of behavioral introversion. So, not just our trait of we put ourselves somewhere along the spectrum in general, but in a particular context, what are we manifesting in terms of our behavior? And the key difference between introverts and extroverts is that extroverts think while they speak to figure out what they're thinking, and introverts think before they speak. If we're behaviorally introverted in a particular context, we have a higher bar that we have to clear before we share something. And I'm still this way in a lot of contexts, not with friends and family, but at work or in social situations with people I don't know. And this also came up very strongly when I have been in situations, and other people I think can relate, where I felt like I didn't have much power or I wasn't part of the dominant group. So actually growing up, I shared, I'm white American from the racially dominant group in my country, but our family was poor, and I grew up with a lot of rich kids. And so I felt like an outsider. So I felt like I didn't belong. So I was reluctant to speak. And then joining the workforce, all of us join at a junior level, and we feel the weight of the hierarchy upon us. And if you're the junior person in the room, it's harder to speak up, and your bar is higher to think, do I have a good enough thing to say? And then also cross culturally, if we're talking about nations and languages, I spent a year living abroad in another country when I was in high school, speaking another language that I wasn't fluent in. And anytime we're speaking in a language that we're not fluent in, we become a behavioral introvert, because you have to think before you speak, because you have to translate the thing before you say it. So I love helping people and leaders, especially, bring out introverts' great ideas, because those ideas are the introverts' ideas that are not getting expressed on average are better than the extroverts' ideas that are being expressed. And that includes people in positions of power, like now me as a professor. We just get to blah, 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 talk about whatever we want. So we don't have a gatekeeper. And so our average ideas are just worse, the ones that get expressed, I mean.
Makes total sense to me. And I'm an introvert myself, so this really resonates. And I know that it's hard sometimes to speak up, to use our voice. You actually start your book highlighting the fact that, in spite of that, in spite of the fact that a lot of people feel this way, we were all born to influence. And I couldn't agree more with this. But what strikes me, as I've mentioned, is that, we are born with actually probably many other superpowers as well. And influence is just one of them. But then we lose them as we grow up. In your view, what are the key factors that diminish our influencing superpower, perhaps internal factors? You've mentioned some of the external ones. And how can we reclaim this superpower?
It's interesting that you ask about internal ones, because the ones that I can think of that are internal come externally, and then we internalize them, like patriarchy, right? As a cultural influence that is probably impossible for us not to internalize in almost whatever culture we're in. And in a lot of cultures, this is changing. The well-meaning people who teach us to play small are, to me, the most poignant influence of this external force that becomes internalized, where we diminish ourselves. And this is our parents and our teachers, who are teaching us to be good students and to play nice with others and to fit in. And they're teaching us the rules of being a good team member or being a good person in a group. They want us to succeed. They want the group to thrive. It's all good intentions. But what happens is they're telling us, don't speak up, don't advocate for yourself, give space to other people. And while, yes, we all need to have space, we all need to be able to advocate for ourselves. And, we need to make compromises and listen, and we do need to play well with others. But what we internalize from that ends up being, at a deep level, maybe I'm not worthy, and maybe I shouldn't speak up, and maybe I shouldn't take up space. And we're not even conscious of a lot of these messages that we're getting. And then it gets very difficult to overcome. And when we have these good student habits that we carry to the workforce, we are really doing everybody a disservice when we expect that just working hard will get us rewarded and recognized. Like, we're waiting for a gold star from the teacher, and everybody else is just busy doing their own work, and they're not there to evaluate us and give us feedback and develop us, except for the best managers. Well, or maybe the worst managers as well. And we just need to, in order to shepherd and develop ourselves and our careers, we need to still practice influence and advocacy, self-advocacy, but also practicing advocating on behalf of others too. So influence is this, it's not just a superpower, it is the key skill for getting the things done that we want to do. And it becomes more and more and more important as we rise in positions of increasing power and responsibility, because there's so much we can do. And because our great ideas depend on so many people to make them happen.
Yeah. And I love how you talk in the book about the fact that we are born with this and we just need to reclaim it. It really resonates with me. And interestingly, when you've mentioned these things that we have internalized and what impact they have on how we show up, we had a workshop yesterday in the community that we run for culture leaders on conflict. And the person who led this workshop asked us a really interesting question. And the question was, what is your conflict rucksack or backpack? I think you would say in America. And what the facilitator meant by that was, what have you learned and internalized about conflict as a child? It was so eye opening for me because I realized, for example, for me, that I grew up in a family where A, my dad had a temper, and so he would get irritated easily. And B, my parents weren't very happy together. So there was a lot of conflict happening, and I always felt like I need to harmonize. And reflecting on that was really insightful for me because I realized, why I show up in conflict situations as the harmonizer, for example, all the time. And I think it's a very useful exercise to do around influence as well. So, what are the kind of things that we have internalized as children and how they stand in the way of us basically unleashing the superpower that we have inherently, but which is blocked right now. So I really appreciate the way you talk about this.
So interesting, this example. When you said what's in your conflict rucksack, I thought you were going to say, what are the tools that you have at your disposal? But it was also like, what is the burden weighing you down?
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of tools, though, your comment also reminds me of some interesting research that I have read about adult children of addicts, alcoholics, drug addicts, and how very commonly they develop a very keen EQ and a very keen attunement to other people's emotions. And so people like you and I too, I relate to the kind of family situation you grew up in, because we had to be very careful to notice when there's conflict or we want to notice before somebody loses their temper so that we can protect ourselves or protect other people. We can end up bringing it as a skill, which you and I now do in our work.
Yeah, so true.
I also want to recognize and appreciate that you sharing that you too are an introvert. And I think that you identify at least internally as an introvert. And a lot of people wouldn't expect people like us to be doing the work that we're doing. But so many of us who do work actively with people and like you professionally having conversations and making them public, right? It seems like, and leading all these workshops and change interventions that you do, people would probably guess that you're an extrovert, but that's not necessarily the case at all.
Absolutely. And actually, I find that a lot of people who have social anxiety, even and are introverts and or are introverts, they often actually seek roles or jobs that require certain exposure because it's almost like, at least for me, it's a role that I play, and this role allows me. So, as a facilitator or as an interviewer, it allows me to tap into something in myself that otherwise perhaps I wouldn't be able to. And it creates also certain constraints. And I think we all need constraints when we are in a situation that is not entirely comfortable because roles are prescribed. You kind of know what you're supposed to be doing in this context. At least this is how it's showing up for me. I'm curious what you think about it.
I just want to say yes, absolutely to everything that you just said. Yeah, I completely agree. I got interested in understanding how people relate to each other, perceive each other, interact with each other when I started doing theater for similar reasons. Being in a context where you are in a safe, prescribed, rule based environment where it's clear who's talking, who's listening, and what you're going to say. So I hadn't thought of it in the way you described, but I relate to it a lot.
So, our audience, Zoe, are predominantly people. They are HR leaders who want to create a culture where people do their best work. And they think about those things all the time. They think about introverts and extroverts, and they think about how to enable others to do the best work. They have a lot of passion. They have plenty of great ideas how to make work work. But often these ideas fall on deaf ears. And I want to ask on behalf of our audience, what should they do and where should they start? Should they start where your book starts, which is becoming the person that others want to say yes to? Is it a good place, would you say?
I think it depends who we're talking about and where they are. I mean, it will be all context dependent. A lot of people and HR leaders who I work with and meet have spent so much time working on developing other people that they may not have given themselves the space and the time for self-development. So for someone in that situation, absolutely, absolutely. If you don't feel that you are able to be walking the talk because you're giving so much to other people, whatever it looks like for you, to take time to develop yourself into the real role model that other people can look up to and emulate, I would encourage you to take that time and space. And for anybody who wants to start a practice, I expect this is what you teach in your coaching. But whatever the practice is, I would just start with something small and concrete because it's very hard to change more than one behavior at a time. And when I'm teaching my boot camp class that I teach on influence with MBA students at Yale, the very first challenge we do when we start the class is 24 hours of no. So a lot of people find this kind of scary and enticing. So if this might be the thing to try, 24 hours, you say no to each person who comes and asks you for something or invites you to do something. And the idea is not that you ruin your life, so take care of yourself. But the idea isn't that you have to say no to every single request. It's to experience saying no to each person. So let's just say you have a child who's coming and asking you all kinds of things. You need to say no to that kid for 24 hours. But if it feels unnatural to say no the first time, really feel what that's like, experience it, experience their reaction. How about saying no to a boss, right? Many of us feel that we can't, that it's impossible, or saying no to a colleague or a partner. What we find typically when leaders, employees, students try this challenge is that maybe 90% of us discover that we're even more of a people pleaser than we thought that we were. And lots of us know that we're people pleasers. I still am, but we don't know how much until we realize that our default reaction is just to try to say yes because we like people and we want to be helpful and we want to be generous. And what ends up happening is other people just, they get to be the boss of us and they get to be the dispensers of our time, which is this incredibly valued and finite resource. So first, oh my gosh, I could have so much more influence over my own life if I said no. But also, what the vast majority of people who try this exercise experience is that other people hearing no are typically fine and it's not a big deal. Or they just say, like, oh, why? What's going on? Are you okay? And it's not that they are horrified or hate us or think that we're greedy or whatever. So we realized there's just a lot more space and a lot more freedom we could give ourselves. And then the secret sauce magic of this that's not obvious, that only comes through practice. And if you continue and then start paying attention to your own requests to other people after this, is that when we get comfortable with saying no to other people, we get more comfortable with the idea and the experience of other people saying no to us. And when we're more comfortable with other people saying no, then when we're making requests and using and expanding our influence, they have less neediness and they're not repulsive in that way that somebody who's needy or entitled, it doesn't matter what their request is. If they come to you in that way, you just want to say no, 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 no. So this is a small but really important piece of the magic of becoming someone other people want to say yes to.
I love that because A, it's quite counterintuitive, and I love counterintuitive advice. And it's so true that especially for people, it's not so much about accommodating or building relationships because they already do that. What they do need is to set some boundaries sometimes and feel more comfortable. It almost sounds to me like it's reclaiming our sense of agency first. So in a way, we are becoming stronger in ourselves and reclaiming the agency so that then we can influence others. Because it's important, I imagine, to right to influence others, to have that sense of agency ourselves first.
Yes. I love the framing of it that you put around that.
I'd love to explore the opposite scenario though as well, because our people, which to a great extent is the audience of this show, I can only imagine that how they will struggle with saying no, how hard it will be to set boundaries and how empowering it might be. There are other people in their organizations, and especially I think some leaders in high growth and very fast paced organizations that actually use a lot of these transactional influence tactics. And when you start talking to them about, becoming the person that people want to say yes to and sort of personal influence, they intellectually, of course, get it. They understand that influence is a two-way street, but their pushback is going to be, I don't have time for that. I need to move fast. I need to get results really fast. What would you say to that?
I would ask about a particular context because I've actually never heard anyone say, I don't have time for that. So I think you must be thinking of some particular kind of situation.
I don't want to get too specific. I do have a specific situation in mind, but a lot of times people in positions of formal power, they will mandate something without really investing time in influencing others because they feel like they are in this position of power where basically for things to happen, it's enough for them to tell people that these things need to happen. And, very often it works, right? Or at least it seems like it works because to their face, people will say, sure, we'll give it a go, we'll do it. So I find that for a lot of senior leaders, they don't necessarily always see the business case, for personal influence.
My experience with senior leaders has been that senior leaders really get the business case for interpersonal influence. So I'm sure there's some who don't and absolutely understand the rush of, I don't have time for consensus building, say, in some sort of formal way. But what I see more often that's harder to deal with is that it's very difficult to foresee what kinds of changes are not going to be a big deal and they can be mandated. And, like let's say you have some little change that's going to save people time in the work that they do. Okay, great. Wonderful. Maybe that's something that can just happen. And you just tell people, hey, there's this new process. Although, even something like that, because you're asking people to change a habit, can be more effortful than you think. But an example of this wasn't even an attempt at a culture change. This was a beta test pilot that was people really trying to do the right thing and didn't foresee the backlash that they would get. So I share this in the context of expect to have some backlash and also expect that there's things that you can do to prevent it, even when you're doing something really, really tiny. This was the Google food team who I've done a bunch of consulting work with. They were interested in helping people eat more sustainably. And lots of Google employees care about the environment. And one of the ways to do that is eat less meat. So there was this movement that I think it started in the States and definitely expanded through a number of countries in Europe that was called Meatless Monday. And it was organizations like companies and schools feeding employees or students, they did it in the military as well, 1 day a week for one meal. There's no meat on the plate, and you get to experience that you can have something tasty and filling, even if it doesn't have meat in it. So overall, seems like people should be so happy with this. However, the Google food team hired us to come on board and help them with interventions later after this because they had Meatless Monday at one out of the 24 cafes in their headquarters. And obviously one day a week because it's Monday, 1 month of the year. And even though it's 1 out of 12 months, 1 out of 24 cafes, and 1 out of 7 days of the week, there was a huge uproar. When I say a huge uproar, not the majority of people, but enough vocal, angry people who were highly influential that hosted a pig roast in the parking lot of that cafe. And they went into that cafe to get the plates, the cups, the napkins, and they publicized it to everybody. And what the leaders didn't foresee, by the way, this didn't just happen at Google, but I'm told that in Germany, maybe the Green Party actually lost an election because of the Meatless Monday campaign that people were so upset about.
Wow.
And there have been widespread protests at schools in France and in the UK for similar reasons. People don't want to be told what to do. So we have this inner 2-year-old that's resistant and reactant. And if you think I'm telling you what to do, especially if you think I'm telling you how to be a better person, and then I'm telling you that you're a bad person, Meatless is focused on we're taking away your meat, we're not giving you a choice, and we're doing it because you're a bad person. You don't care about animals, you're a murderer, you don't care about the environment. And so, we're going to have this paternalistic influence that everybody hates. And that's a huge risk for a lot of culture changes. So, a small kind of thing that a lot of people listening in the audience will already be doing, but maybe not everyone has thought about it in this way, is that people are more open-minded to coming on board with principles or values because a lot of us share common values. And these are things that can be discussed, but just imagine any corporate value in a mission statement. There are very few people in any organization who would disagree with it. We can find better fits in some organizations than others, but typically these are universal values. But where people can get very resistant and difficult is about the behaviors and the actions that are getting taken in support of those values. And so doesn't have to take a long time to discuss and bring people on board with the values, but then just reaching out to ask people for their thoughts, doing surveys, having conversations, focus groups about, okay, if this is the value that we agree on, what are 3 simple actions that we can do to put into place to support that value? And the actions might be themselves less important than the fact that it's the employees who generated them and suggested them. And you're creating an inclusive culture in this way. And nobody's saying employees were telling you what to do. It's, okay, guys, this is what you said you wanted. So sustainable eating isn't something that people hate in general. It's just that they want to choose, what does that look like?
Obviously, now I'm curious, how had you advised Google on that? And what did they do? And what impact did it have?
We've done a lot of experiments with them and a lot of different campaigns with specifically having people eat less meat and more vegetables. We just made the vegetables delicious and fun and beautiful. And we had special featured veggie of the day instead of Meatless Monday. There's veggie of the day. And we made fun posters and with trivia and weird facts and questions and things like that. It's not rocket science. They did an intervention that I was not part of, and I have mixed feelings about it, but where they hired very attractive people and had very attractive people going around and offering you samples of whatever the vegetables. Essentially, here's some great vegetables, try some great vegetables. We're not telling you that you can't eat meat. And we did that, the veggie of the day intervention with the 5 most hated vegetables. So we did a survey first to find out what veggies do people really, really hate. So there was parsnips, which happens to be my least favorite, Brussels sprouts, which is crazy because they're delicious, butternut squash, which is also delicious, beets, which are also delicious. And I think I don't know, maybe it was cabbage or something. The last one, but even with people's most hated vegetables, they ended up eating about 3 times as much as when we didn't do the fun interventions.
Wow, that's amazing. And of course, it makes intuitive sense. And there's plenty of research to support this. I love this example that you give in the book about what Domino's did to increase their orders. I don't know if you want to share this story, because it's also such a beautiful illustration of how, by making the desired behaviors easier for people, you can achieve so much, because you are just creating the right environment for them to take the decision that ultimately is going to benefit, of course, both parties, because we certainly are not talking here about manipulating people into doing something that they don't want to do.
Right. And with any behavior that we would like people to change, making it as easy as possible is the most influential thing we can do, usually. And the Domino's example was really impressive to me because it helped them go from number 2 pizza company in the United States in this market, which is so saturated, to number 1 biggest pizza company in the world, and not just surpassing their competitor, which at that time was Pizza Hut, but they expanded the market for pizza, even in places like the United States, where anyone who's been here for any amount of time will know we just eat a ton of pizza. It's crazy. So they made it easier to eat pizza than to eat other kinds of foods, and far easier to get pizza from Domino's than from Pizza Hut or another place. And I like this example because they were not being too creative about it. They were copycatting Amazon. So anytime you want to be more influential and you see somebody doing something that you could just copy, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to be creative. Just copy their thing. So Amazon had really created the success of their company based, first of all, on one-click shopping and subscribe and save. So Amazon said, we know where you live. We have your payment information. So just click a button every time you want the thing, and you don't have to go through the checkout process. At that time, 78% of items in customers' digital shopping carts in all digital retail were getting abandoned because of friction in the process. So this was huge innovation by Amazon. Domino's then says, okay, well, we want to make it as easy as possible to order a pizza. We know where you live, we have your payment information, and we also know your favorite pizza. So if you just text us or tweet us an emoticon of a pizza, then poof, like magic, your favorite pizza shows up at your house. Amazon had subscribe and save. Domino's said, hey, we noticed a lot of people actually get the same pizza every week. So we'll offer an option like subscribe and save, just sign up once, and then poof, like magic, your favorite pizza shows up every week. This was, I think, more of a PR thing for Domino's, but Amazon had a physical button called a dash button that you could push, put it anywhere in your house, and it orders one specific product of, maybe you programmed it for cat food and orders your cat's food. So Domino's had the pizza button. That's a physical button that you can push when you want pizza. I think because of kids, not a good idea for any company to have a physical button that you can push and then products appear like magic at your house. So this campaign in 2018, within 1 year, just launched Domino's over their competitor into the stratosphere. They've maintained this market share. And another thing they do now is that they make it feel easier to get your pizza. And this is important, that it's not just logistically how easy is it to do something, but subjectively how easy or difficult does it feel. And Domino's in this case copied companies like Uber that show you the trajectory moment by moment of your person coming to you to pick you up or make the delivery. And so you experience that the thing you've asked for is coming, and it calms you down and makes you feel like, okay, great, it's on the way. You don't have to wonder, did they really get my order? Am I really getting a ride? And there's this consultancy, leadership consultancy, that has, for anyone who's a super nerd, there's a book, but actually, let me recommend instead, there's an HBR article that is called something like The Effortless Experience. That's the name of the book. This is about the customer effort score. And the customer effort score just essentially asks one question, which is how much effort did it take to do that thing you were trying to do? Like maybe it's to, say, order a pizza. Maybe it's to resolve a problem with customer service. Maybe it's to find the information that you need. And the way you answer that question, how much effort did it take, is more predictive of some of the most important outcomes in business, like customer loyalty or repurchasing or negative word of mouth. which is more powerful than positive word of mouth, which is more powerful than advertising and marketing. All that matters is how difficult you say it was. And Aga, the customer effort score, it's cool because it's not actually measuring effort. It's measuring perceived effort. And that's what makes all the difference. Like when you think about last time you've been on hold waiting for customer service to pick up, it should be the easiest thing in the world because you're literally doing nothing, but it feels so onerous. And as the seconds tick by, I get angrier and angrier waiting for them to pick up. Customer effort score, it doesn't have to be just in a marketing context, but we can use this measuring with employees. How difficult was it for you to do that thing that you needed to do? I hope that it will help us strip away some bureaucracy.
It's a really fascinating thing how powerful that can be. So we already have a few principles. So we talked about becoming the person people want to say yes to. We talked about making things effortless or easy if we want people to change. And I'd like for us to perhaps weave in some of the other principles that you talk about into a sort of a case study, because the people who listen to this show are usually people who are always tinkering with company culture. They're trying to influence behaviors and convince others that there are possibly better ways of doing things and making work. So let's say that someone is trying to influence everyone in the organization to engage in daily exchange of candid developmental feedback. And I'd love for you to guide this person. Like, what do they need to know or do to maximize the chances of success of this?
This is a great topic because it's of common concern and it's so rare that employees get the amount of feedback that they want. And you said daily, in the moment, informal developmental feedback, and that's exactly how we need it and how we want it, right? But first of all, most people are not trained in doing it well. And so let's just say you're the person running HR in your large organization. And I would be asking you, okay, Aga, what kind of training do people have right now in your organization to be better at giving this developmental feedback? So we can find out, are we supporting them?
People are getting a feedback module as part of the leadership development program. So, one of the modules is on how to give feedback, and they learn a few models of giving people feedback. And then we also have online self paced modules available for anyone who would like to refresh that. So these are the two things that are being on offer right now in our organization.
And I'll ask you, how do you know how effective those are?
Well, we have these happy sheets. So we evaluate whether people enjoyed the training, but also whether it has helped them to develop the skills that they need to give feedback. Obviously, the experience and the skills of the facilitator. And it's all been great. So we collaborate with an amazing provider. They're really good at this, and people are always very happy about what they've learned as part of that training.
Are the employees being surveyed to measure how effective the feedback is, the feedback training?
Yeah, we have the annual employee engagement survey, and this is actually the main reason why we want more feedback to happen in our organization. People say that they don't receive enough feedback, especially that informal daily feedback. It's an issue. Obviously, we know that it has an impact on performance. We know that it has impact on employee growth and development and satisfaction and engagement as well. We talk to people during exit interviews, and it's actually one of the reasons why people leave, because they don't know how well they are doing. And that can be very demotivating.
So I guess I would question the confidence and comfort about the training that's happening if it's not leading to employees feeling like they're getting the kind of feedback that they want. Because a lot of times the feedback that is comfortable for a manager to give is different from the kind of feedback that an employee wants. And especially when we're talking about developmental feedback. So a lot of managers are comfortable giving praise because it makes people feel good, right? But then it doesn't help the employee do their job, or they're comfortable with getting trained in conversations that might happen at, say, an annual employee review, where they can have a difficult conversation, give that developmental feedback, and the employee ends up feeling traumatized, even if they've done it in a supposedly skillful way because it wasn't happening on the regular basis, like you're talking about. So you may already be working with the absolute gold standard feedback delivery consultancy, and there might be still some pieces that could be shifted around meaningfully in the kind of training that happens. I'm also curious about when you say employees are not getting this kind of developmental feedback, a lot of times what I hear from the leaders that I work with, I do a lot of leadership development programs, is that it just doesn't feel comfortable telling somebody something that they didn't do perfectly, because in a one-off situation, like somebody's basically good, they kind of didn't do their best on this one project, but you don't want to complain every time they didn't do something perfectly because you don't want to demotivate them. And this is like in any close relationship, right? Like with a partner or a friend, you don't want to complain every time they didn't do something perfectly. And the employee then really doesn't know, what did they do perfectly? What did they do imperfectly? And they don't feel that you have their back and you have their best interest if you're not giving them developmental feedback that is very, very concrete, giving them something, one thing that they can work on and they can be changing right then. Also, this is probably not with your employees because they have this great developmental feedback program. But what I hear as a complaint from employees frequently is that the developmental feedback they get is on how they sucked in this thing that they already did, a mistake that already happened, but it's not couched and delivered in a way that says, here's what you can work on to help be even better in the future. And it's so, I think also just people are so sensitive that it makes a lot of us reluctant to give developmental feedback. And also for people who are giving developmental feedback and are kind of the brusque sort of hard driving person you were describing before, that's like, I don't have time. Like, listen, you did this thing, it's crap. You can't do it again. We're underestimating how sensitive people are and how it's literally hard to hear if the impact of the feedback isn't being measured the employee level, if it's being measured at the manager level, that's not very meaningful if what you care about is the actual outcome. What I would say, like, just as a very concrete thing for someone in an organization struggling with this problem, is a place to start is to think about finding out who are the employees who feel that they're getting great developmental feedback. And then, so at the employee level, who's very satisfied with their developmental feedback and they're getting it on a regular basis, it's actionable, it's helpful, good relationship with their manager. And then who are the managers of those managers? Focus on that third level. What are those people doing to coach the managers who have the good employees? And of course, you can also find out maybe these managers came from another organization where they got coached by somebody else. They had a great mentor, but focusing on at least these two layers above to find out in your organization, what does that look like? And then we can be shining a light on these stars and saying, look at this person who does this great thing, and using all of our other, whatever our influence techniques are.
The social proof.
Yeah, yeah. And just choosing one tiny focused thing and saying, here's what Aga does, be like Aga.
Yeah, and this is actually, I was channeling an organization that I know, and this is actually the case. In that case, that there is this one department where, because of the nature of the work, they do a lot of daily feedback because that department develops software. So, in doing work like that, there needs to be feedback going on literally on hourly basis very often. So that team was very satisfied with the feedback that they were getting. And I think it's always interesting to look at these bright spots and identify the practices and what people do and the benefits that they get. So I just want us to zoom out from this a little bit and focus on some principles. So what I heard from you is, train your people so that they can feel comfortable enough, because you want to make giving feedback less difficult. So back to the principle, make it easy and as effortless as you can. Let's assume that you've identified these bright spots and you've really hired the best consultants in the world, and people have done a lot of role plays and they're super comfortable. What would be your next step? What else would you be doing to trigger people to give that daily, frequent feedback that is balanced, maybe not just focused on what people can do better, but also, of course, on what they're doing well? But I think most importantly, it's having an impact, because I think at the end of the day, when we do something as difficult as giving someone feedback, I'm assuming ideally our intention is to have positive impact on this person. And the fear is, as you've mentioned, that not only will not have positive impact, but we will demotivate them. So apart from training and highlighting other great examples, what else is there that we can do to make this initiative more successful?
This actually connects with the book that I wanted to recommend. So you and I were talking about favorite books related to this. And I love this book by Laszlo Bock called Work Rules. He was the head of HR at Google. Now he started a consultancy called Humu. And there's a chapter in this book that's called Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. One of the things that he's talking about in this chapter on culture is how at Google, they wanted to create a culture where people talk to each other when they have a problem instead of backstabbing, or instead of, you go to somebody's boss or boss's boss or whatever. And so the behavior that people started to do was, if you sent me an email complaining about somebody, then I'm going to add that person to the email in my reply. And very, very quickly, you realize, wow, if I'm going to say something behind their back, I'm also saying it to their face. And so why don't I just go and have a conversation face to face with them, or, send them the email rather than going behind their back. But that's just one example of a very concrete behavior. But when we're talking about developmental feedback on a regular basis, I would ask, in your organization, is it possible to be giving these managers who you would like to encourage to give more developmental feedback on a regular basis, to give them feedback about their feedback? So is there a 2-question survey that you could be asking their employees week by week for a 6-week period? And employees want to encourage their managers to give more frequent feedback and better feedback. So can we find out from their employees? Let's say you have a team, 26 people on your team, and then every week I'm giving you, here are the 26 comments and here's your score from this week, so that so that you're getting the same kind of feedback that we're asking you to give. Nobody wants to be answering 2 questions every single day. But if it's something that employees actually want, they don't mind answering those questions 6 times in 6 weeks.
An additional benefit of that is that you are demonstrating that you actually heard that feedback that employees have given you in the employee engagement survey, right? Because very often people will say what they want more of, and then nothing happens. And I think this is the most frustrating things that happens in organizations. I often hear people tell me, we've communicated this problem to leadership 1,000 times and nothing happened. So I think just putting a spotlight on those areas that people want more of is such a beautiful demonstration that you're actually committed to making it work. Not to mention the data that you get right from something like that. I love this idea. I think that it can be very, very effective. And I wish we had more time to talk about more ideas, but I know that we are running towards the end of our time. So I want to shift gears a little bit and move to our rapid fire questions section. The idea here is that I'm going to ask you 5 questions in rapid succession, and you'll try to answer all 5 in under 2 minutes. And you've actually already answered, I think, one of them. So the first question, how do you define company culture?
I am not the expert that you are, Aga, but I would say company culture is the personality of the company as the employees would describe it.
What is the sign that the company's approach to how they shape their culture is not working and their culture needs some work or perhaps even a major overhaul?
In some companies, employees will tell you and employees will respond to surveys about this question. But what I've observed it often looks like is employees are leaving and they're leaving without telling you. They're getting frustrated talking to their friends, but they're not coming to HR if they don't believe that it's something soluble.
What company do you admire for the culture and why?
I want to actually focus on a very specific piece of a large company. And I don't know what the culture is at the company, which is US Bank. I think it's the sixth largest bank in the United States. And I recently got to work with a team that's a large team run by, I think there are 26,000 employees on this team. So it's the size of a substantial company. And it's run by Tim Welsh, and it's their consumer and business banking team. And Tim Welsh is such a motivating, inspiring, kind, and empathetic leader that meeting him and meeting his team, I felt like, oh my God, I never want to have a boss again. Except if I did, I would love to work for Tim. And he's so beloved that in his hometown, home city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis had a Tim Welsh Day. And when I talked to
Wow.
Tim's employees, so many of them said the reason that I've been at US Bank for all these years, 17 years or 25 years, is because of Tim. And if he ever leaves, I will go.
That's amazing. Are there any more books that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh my gosh, there's so many books. I'm going to grab one more on my top shelf. I'm a real nerd. I love reading. This is another book that I really love. This is by Dolly Chugh, and it's called The Person You Mean to Be. And it's a really wonderful book on a practical way to support leaders and people who care about diversity, influence, and inclusion. And it's written in such a warm and pleasurable, concrete way. It's a wonderful book.
Is she the lady who talks about being goodish?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I love this concept. Yes, I need to read the whole book. I've heard this concept and I think I have so many books that I haven't read. I have this book. I need to read it. I heard a lot of good things about it. So thank you for recommending it.
Yeah. And for people who have read it, she has a newer book that's called A More Just Future, which is also fantastic.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Zoe, for that. I have one final question, which is, was there a question that I haven't asked you that I should have?
I would say one more thing that I would love to share with the leaders listening to our conversation right now. For people who do care about those issues that Dolly and I and you, I know, care about, to consider influence from the perspective of asking gaps as well. So when you were talking about people who just charge ahead versus people who hold back, asking gaps are distributed along lines of power and privilege, and people with more power and privilege ask more often for more than people without it. And what happens is those of us who are people pleasers, people, we're supportive and kind, we tend to be reflexively and reactively generous. We reward the people who ask, and we just don't notice the people who don't. And so my challenge to leaders who are in this situation that most of the people I like the most are in is when somebody comes and asks you for a privilege or an exception or some extra resources, to ask yourself who could have asked, but they didn't. And is there a policy that should change?
I love that. Yeah, what a great thought. And I know that it's going to resonate with a lot of our listeners who care about shaping the future, shaping organizations, and definitely try to change processes and procedures and structures and systems. Thank you for that. So, one final thing, if our listeners want to learn more about you, what are the best places they could go to get your book or read more about your work or get in touch with you?
So my book, it's Influence is Your Superpower. The book is structured in a way that you don't have to read it from beginning to end at all. There are chapters about charisma, negotiations, negotiating while female, and handling resistance. ease, lots of other stuff. It's translated into 28 languages, and the Asian languages are just coming out now, but European languages are out, and it's pretty easy to find. I have a website, zoechance.com, and I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Zoe Chance, and go ahead and send me a connection. It defaults to follow, but I'd love to be connected with you as well. Thank you for this conversation. And I especially loved, Aga, the way that you have, and I've heard this in your conversations with other people too, of drawing lessons and connections, and you invite your guests to tell stories and share research and ideas, and then you do the sewing and the pull through that makes it into a tapestry that actually makes sense. And I appreciated your doing that in this conversation with me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That's so kind of you to say. I really enjoyed this conversation. But to be honest, I wish we had triple the time, quadruple the time, because there's so many questions that I haven't had the chance to ask you. So one thing that I want to say to our listeners is definitely get the book, because it's chock full of really actionable insights. And I know that for a lot of you, you have been looking for strategies to influence. And this book, honestly, I think it's not only actionable, but it's written in a way that resonated with me. I've read a lot of influence books that felt a bit manipulative, and the way you approach influence is a way that aligns with my values. And I haven't found a lot of books that talk about this topic in this way. So thank you for doing that, because I think we need to bust some myths about influence, and we need to make it accessible to decent people who don't want to manipulate others.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And that's why I wrote this book. Also, for listeners to know, I'm donating half my profits from the book to organizations that are working on the climate crisis, because I really believe in good influence, and I really believe in stepping up and walking the talk. And so I love connecting with people in organizations who are working on sustainability and working on the climate, especially. But any leaders trying to do good, I'd love to connect with you. And thank you for this conversation. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you, Zoe. I'm Aga Bajer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast. And this is the Culture Lab team.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Thank you for spending your time with Zoe and me on this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found this chat insightful, inspiring, or useful, and I'm guessing you did since you're still here, do me a favor. Take a few seconds to share this episode and have a chat with someone about what you learned. Because when podcasts like this spark conversations, and those conversations turn into actions, that's when we start making real change in the workplace together. And if you are looking to dig deeper into these topics and connect with others who are shaping the culture within the organization, consider joining CultureBrained. We put together a cohort of the best, most ambitious culture leaders to help them accelerate progress in their culture work. To find out more and apply, head over to tinyurl.com/culturebrained. The link is in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to get free resources on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: agabayer.com/resources. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, please do it now. That's the best way you can support our work. And finally, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform that you listen to. Thank you, and you are amazing for listening to this point. Not many people do.